This is going to be a fun episode. We are here to give nuggets of wisdom to help you in your life, and I am excited to talk about this next topic. I think it is probably one of the bigger problems facing all of Western civilization. That problem, do you even know what I'm going to say yet, Nadia?
I don't. I'm
We're
nervous.
talking about victimhood. Victimhood, being a victim, and that kind of goes along with, I believe, entitlement and indifference. But victimhood is a common, I feel like it's a rising problem. And first of all, it's a lot cooler nowadays to be a victim. It's actually a way to gain power, is being a victim. When I say being a victim, I'm not obviously referring to if last night you had 3 people jump out of a van and beat you up. You were a victim, and you should embrace that as you go to the police and find these guys. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about if you were hit by a hurricane and your house got torn apart. Yes, you were a victim of a hurricane. However, some of the same principles still apply here. Eventually you have to move on, but I'm talking about people that basically embrace and enjoy being a victim and use that for power. And here's the first thing, and this is something I learned early on, probably about 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago. And I've had people argue this with me, but they can't really logically, because everybody, if you really think about it deeply, it is fun and exciting to be a victim. Do you agree with that?
Definitely feels good for people to care.
Or just my take on it is it kind of people always say, oh no, why would you say I'm excited to be a victim? You don't know what I'm talking about. Why would I be excited that this happened to me or this person didn't like me? The reality is it feels good to basically have some type of cause deep within you that you can stew about. It feels, it gets the adrenaline going. I was working for this company once. I'll use an personal example. I was working for this company once, and I got terminated, fired, for doing something I would say is in like the gray area. I mean, it wasn't quite black and white. It was probably in the gray area. And it took me probably 2 years to actually come to terms with the fact that all of it 100% was my fault. However, in that next 2 years, I spent almost every day at some point stewing about how I got screwed over. And it felt good. I would call people up and rant about it. I would, every single day, if you look at the amount of emotional energy or mental energy I devoted towards just thinking about how I'd been cheated or screwed over. It's fascinating, but the reality is all of that was a waste. None of that basically helped me move forward. And I probably wasted about 1.5 years, 2 years of my life just basically soaked in enjoying feeling like a victim. I think it feels really good. It basically, you get sympathy from people, or you just get sympathy from yourself, where you can walk around and basically give yourself an excuse as to why you don't have what you want or you're not where you want to be. And it empowers people. Nowadays, it's gotten to the point where I feel like people sometimes create victim status, where they almost want to feel like they were discriminated against, or they, they didn't get this because of who they are. And so therefore they won't even promote that on social media. And it's a pandemic that is going to ruin the happiness of people's lives, but also ruin society as far as moving forward. That is my thesis for today. But victimhood, especially in this younger generation, is it's something you want to avoid. And I can go into how to avoid it and why. It is fun. It feels good. However, nothing productive comes from it long term. It's a short-term drug that people get addicted to. And we all know we all do it ourselves, but we do know somebody who basically is always claiming that basically they were victimized by someone else, and therefore, and the bottom line is it doesn't matter and no one cares.
So what are the steps, Matt, to become addicted to victimhood? Where do you start and how do you get to that point?
I think the first step is not being able to look in the mirror and accept responsibility. I think that's the root of the issue. Is number one, just basically not being okay with looking in the mirror and asking yourself, how did my actions lead to this, or why did this happen? That's number one. I think number two is once again, it's just become, I think the problem is it's become so commonplace and so okay. I guess, probably 50 years ago it was a little bit less tolerated even in society for someone just to always claim victim status. And nowadays, I feel like these people are often getting highlighted or basically, getting consoled by a lot of society. First of all, why is victim mentality problematic? If you had to give like 3 reasons or so, what are some reasons victim mentality is problematic? Just
Sure.
to simplify.
Yeah, I mean, well, it feels empowering, right? When you're the victim, when you are in this spot where people are feeling good for you, it makes you feel like you are morally right. You have the idea that what you think, no matter what, is the right thing.
Feel superior in some ways, yeah.
You feel right, and everybody wants to feel right. Everybody wants to feel heard, like their opinions are correct, want people to agree with them. But it gives people an unearned feeling of moral superiority. And that is something I think we crave. Just it's intrinsic in human nature. But it's also a way for people to avoid responsibility and accountability.
I'm one of the good people and they're all bad.
Yep. And those are the people you actually do have to look out for, right? Just in relationships, in life, people who can never admit that they're wrong.
Exactly.
Or that it's always something that's happening to them, right? Within that, they feel like they're entitled to sympathy and attention and all that stuff.
Okay. Along those lines, if somebody wanted to learn to develop a greater form of self-awareness, what are some signs of, or if they want to notice this in their friends, what are some signs of someone who has a serious case of victim mentality?
Sure. I think a really big one is if you can dramatize insignificant events, things that actually aren't that big of a deal, a fixation on negative events or trauma, too.
Okay.
Just fixating on the things that have happened to you that have gone wrong. Somebody that states that people are better off without them. Somebody who's lacking in empathy. Somebody who's low with self-esteem. Someone who needs excessive attention as well, right? Somebody who blames others for their actions. Someone who has a learned helplessness.
Okay.
Someone who's easily angered or irritated or agitated, right? Or they're somebody with severe self-pity.
So like example would be somebody got a C on a paper and they just, the teacher doesn't like me. It's black and white. It's absolute. And then if somebody said, maybe you should go talk to them. No, I'm not even going to bother because I know they hate me. That kind of thing.
Exactly. Somebody who not only feels badly for themselves all the time, but pulls other people into that.
Yeah. There are so many examples of whatever you're going through in America of people that have overcome racial discrimination. They've overcome socioeconomic status at a young age, being extremely poor, but becoming super rich. If you need an example, go watch the movie Pursuit of Happiness with Will Smith. That's a great example of somebody who had zero victim status and never made an excuse, but he went through a lot of crap to become a multimillionaire and get what he wanted. But these stories are kind of not, I guess, taught as much in society. They almost seem like mythology now. We are the richest, most prosperous country in the world, probably the most free. I don't know, maybe Singapore's up there. But the point is, we're living in the best time ever, in the best place ever. And part of the problem with that is almost things are too easy. And so people look for ways that they are, have been slighted. And that's a big problem. It's there's an example, if we went back 50 years ago, there's so many examples of people that basically have overcome way more than anybody in today's world is dealing with. I mean, one thing I hear a lot about is just inequality of opportunities, or so-and-so got to go to this college, so-and-so got to go to that college. The bottom line is everybody starts off behind somebody. I grew up middle class. I probably had less opportunities than the kids of Donald Trump. Doesn't matter. As long as you can move forward and basically go up the socioeconomic ladder and improve your status and nobody's stopping you, then the last thing you should be focusing on is what somebody else has, or basically how you are being screwed over. I'll get into self-awareness in a second, but that is, I think, learning to develop self-awareness, which is a word a lot of people use. I don't think very few people understand it contextually as far as how it is applied to your life. How am I doing so far? What do you think?
Doing well. Yeah. I mean,
critique my thesis.
It's easy to say, no, you don't actually have it that hard. Your life isn't that difficult. And of course, I don't think that's what either of us are saying, because there are people who do go through genuine traumatic things that do make their life more difficult. But like you said, we are living in the most prosperous nation in the world. And for a lot of people, and I'm sure most of you guys listening can, relate to this or know people who have done this, life is so good that people put an exorbitant amount of energy into finding something that is not good, that is not quote unquote good for them. And I think a big part of that comes down to people feeling entitled to sympathy and attention and wanting these things for different reasons, of course. But how do you deal with a person like that, Matt? What do you do when you recognize someone who is constantly making themselves, when life is constantly just tearing, again, quote unquote, tearing someone down?
It's hard. I mean, if they will have a conversation with me, it's not hard to ask a lot of questions and get them to sort of realize that no matter how hard they have it, they can overcome it, and they could, and they can be doing more. I think a big thing is a little bit human nature. Everybody goes through these little phases where they. I went through one yesterday where I was kind of like comparing my situation to somebody else's, and suddenly thinking like, yeah, he gets everything handed to him, and you know. That's pretty normal. I get myself out of it quickly by basically, once again, looking and saying, what could I do to basically, why am I worrying about him? I need to focus on myself. But a big part of self-awareness is the ability to look in the mirror and kind of figure out your flaws and things that you did for the wrong reasons that cause some of the pain you're experiencing, and, being okay with that. And then learning how to basically change that behavior. That's a big part of being self-aware. It's recognizing when you're kind of, once again, sort of being a victim versus sort of looking at it from a different point of view. I also think I'm a big fan of history, and I also think it's just ludicrous, some of the things that people cry about nowadays, where simple fact that at certain, in the 1940s, a bunch of 18-year-olds all rushed the beaches of Normandy, and a lot of them got slaughtered, and just some of the things that basically 18-year-olds in America had to deal with in the past. Or if you want to go into some type of discrimination, it's weird how people will rant about. I hear stories about the little Disney, the mascot, the puppet,
the
whatever.
mascots,
The puppet didn't hug a certain certain girl of a certain race, and so that means it's racist compared to what people dealt with in the 1950s and 60s. And bottom line is, nobody's stopping you from being who you want to become and doing what you want to do. It may not be an easy path, but if you keep moving forward and you look at an obstacle as just that, an obstacle, and you keep moving forward rather than basically trying to find some institutional societal problem that this reflects, you're probably going to be a lot happier, and you're also going to be a lot more, you're going to get to where you want quicker. Because I mean, honestly, a lot of the stuff feeds itself. I see people that post things on social media about something that happened to them, and then somebody else is chiming in, well, this happened to me, and just turns into a bunch of people complaining.
Right.
It may feel good in the moment. It's not going to help you achieve your goal in life. And yes, some people have it easier than you. That's true, no matter who you are, what gender, race, ethnicity, sexuality you are. But there's also somebody that has it worse than you that's overcome that because they didn't think about all that.
I was going to say that life isn't fair.
And that's, life isn't fair.
Well, question for you, because I mean, obviously having gone through, losing a job, and that's tough. I mean, I went through the exact same thing last year. For you, I mean, how did you go from the stewing and the blaming and the, more of the angry side of that to taking responsibility? How did that feel to finally get to that point where you were like, you know what, this wasn't anybody else, this was me? Was it relieving?
Yeah, it feels great. It's actually liberating. And funny story, actually, this is, I don't know if I'll go into depth on this, but I was actually inspired by a movie. I was, I doubt many people have seen this movie, but there's a movie, American History X. And I was sitting on the couch watching it, and there's a scene where a guy sort of consoling somebody in prison who's so angry and had a bunch of bad things happen to him. And the guy says, you're where you're at now because you are like I was when I was angry. I finally realized I was asking all the wrong questions. And so I finally asked the right question. And it was, how much did all my anger actually improve my life? He's like, when you finally ask yourself that question, you'll be better. And I actually thought about this, and I was like, well, it's a good point. And the point is, it doesn't matter in the end. It's like there wasn't going to be some court case where I was going to go storm in and prove that X, Y, and Z happened and it was unfair, and a judge was going to basically anoint me the greatest person ever and give me a bunch of money. So at some point you get tired of being angry, and hopefully in your life quickly you learn that the quicker you figure out that lesson, the better off you'll be. I wish it hadn't taken me a year and a half, 2 years. I think I learned from that. Now, maybe I feel like I still have moments of victimhood, but I get out of them quickly because I'm able to adapt and adjust and kind of rethink, reprogram how I'm thinking. And it feels awesome. It's an amazing feeling. You sort of feel free. And what's interesting is once that happened, a bunch of good things happened to me. And actually, eventually the company about 6 months later called me to hire me back. It's kind of a weird serendipitous thing. But the moment I finally got over it and took responsibility, a lot of good things, you'll attract a lot of good things in your life. You don't attract many good things in your life when you are constantly focused on the past.
Sure. So I kind of want to springboard from all this, the victimhood, into just quickly talking about forgiveness.
Okay.
Because I think it kind of all ties in together, talking about life isn't fair and this and that. I recently, this past year, had a couple situations where things did not go my way. And it genuinely wasn't my fault. And I genuinely did feel like a victim. And I felt like people had wronged me and done things that weren't the best things for them to do.
Were these like work relationship things or
both?
Both. Okay.
Both. More so relationships. And I think this is what most people can probably relate to the most. Not going to get into details, but there were lies told about me. Rumors were spread, things that I heard that made me really upset. They made me feel bad about myself. I stewed and I sat on them and I was angry and I was mad and I thought about how am I going to confront this person when I see them? What am I going to do?
Get them back.
How am I going to get them back? And what am I going to say? And so it was probably 6 weeks before I was going to see, one of these people again. And so I spent the first 4 weeks. And this was a process.
Did you write a bunch of stuff down?
I did.
I've done that before.
Like crazy person.
All my bullet points.
Yes. I was like, I'm going to say this and this and this. Like in my notes app, and I was so full of anger and wanting I wanted justice, essentially.
I know exactly what you mean.
And it was eating me up inside. I realized one day, every time I thought about it, like you said, multiple times a day, after you lost your job, you were thinking about the things that had gone wrong. And it's like a pang in your stomach when things aren't fair.
I was thinking about all the hypocrisies in it and all the other people that should have been punished that weren't. And yeah.
Yeah. And you feel it. It's like, you're going about your day and bang, you're like, oh my gosh, it's like a shock within me where I feel because I'm so mad, because I have this anger. And it overtook my days. It overtook who I was. And it
hard to sleep sometimes.
It was, my stomach was all messed up. Like it was disaster. And so one day I sat down and I was like, man, I just don't think I'm ever going to get the justice that I'm looking for.
You weren't?
I would never, and I never did. But I realized, and I'm sure you've probably heard this, Matt, but like they say, getting revenge and being mad, it's like poison, right? It's drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. And it hurt. And it was so difficult to get to the point where I was like, you know what? I know who I am. I love myself. I have good intentions. I treat people well. I work really hard. It doesn't matter what other people have to say about me. It doesn't matter. And this is like the other side of the victimhood coin, right? But it all ties in together because once I came to that, once I decided to just forgive, to completely and irrevocably forgive without question, without having a conversation, without needing to confront those people, my self-confidence just shot through the roof because I realized I was in control of how I felt about the situation. People who love me, the people who care about me and know me are going to realize like most of the things those people are saying probably aren't true.
I was going to say, maybe this was cutting, you were bleeding to this, but sorry if you were. But I think the hardest thing a lot of young people I talk to have a hard time with is understanding that forgiveness or even sometimes apologizing it's a self-interested act in a lot of ways. Like a lot of times I'll tell people, why don't you just let it go or forgive them? And they'll sort of think that means that they are giving in or that they're acknowledging the person, what they did is okay, or that they're saying that person is good, or they have to be friends with them. None of those are true. The bottom line is you have to do it genuinely and you have to do it authentically, but it's for you.
Yes.
It's to basically let it out of your system and to let it go. It's the only way to let it go is to basically either to their face or to yourself, just forgive them and maybe assume that they've got a bunch of issues and they're young and dumb and they are just, or maybe they didn't mean for this to happen. Maybe it was more malicious. I don't know the situation, but either way, when you forgive, you let it go, and you become happier.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's like once you reach that point where, well, I was putting so much mental energy, and honestly, it felt like physical energy too, because my body was all messed up. Because of stress
You'll get
and
sick
stress.
from it.
Yes. Once I released that, and I just stopped putting so much energy into something that was honestly kind of hateful, and vengeful. I think that's the word. It's I felt free. I felt liberated. And the same thing with victimhood, because I've been in those situations where I felt so badly for myself because things didn't go my way. But when I forgave myself for thinking that, and kind of gotten to the point where I'm like, yeah, no, this is on me. It's the same feeling. It's the same liberation, releasing the energy and redirecting your energy towards something better, towards what's next.
So actually, let's say somebody's listening who we'll give one example. Let's say obvious one. Let's say they randomly got dumped by their significant other in a cold-hearted way, and they're feeling angry or heartbroken, or maybe some situation. This happens a lot in high school, like a group of friends just stop associating with somebody. It hurts, or you feel angry or whatever, feel like their life sucks now. I've always kind of tried to figure this out in my mind. What is kind of like a little step-by-step process on getting out of that? Because it takes time. It's hard. It's not easy. I'm not going to say you just do it. That would be dumb advice. Just get over it. But what would you say, or if you had to list out some steps, and maybe I can contribute, but ways to kind of work through it quicker and just get.
Yeah. It's funny. I was going to say, it's like the worst is when someone's like, just get over it.
Yeah, just let it go.
Like,
get over it.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I really, really wish I could. That would be awesome.
You're an awesome person. Just let go.
Yeah, you're great. We love you. Just let it go. Man, yeah. Not what you
move on.
Don't say that to people. You don't want to hear it. They probably don't want to hear it either. And I'm probably guilty of saying
cheesy and generic. It doesn't help.
Yeah, it doesn't help. It does take time. I mean, it took you 2 years to get to the point where you were.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, it took probably 6 months, if not longer, to get to that point. We've gotten a little soft as a
society.
Thank you. But you do have to feel all of the feelings. It's almost like going through the 5 stages of grief, right? The anger. What are the stages? You anger, and then, denial, anger, you bargain, depression, and then acceptance. That's right. And I think that's true with lots of different situations, but in many different ways. And that is okay. It's totally okay to not be okay with something at first. But the bad part about that, about holding on, the bad part comes when you hold on to that, when you can't move through those stages.
I've got to fix it, or I've got to, yeah.
Yep. Because sometimes you just can't fix it. There's not anything you can do. And I think that's the acceptance part of it. But that all comes through working through your options, because in my example, with me, I could have gone to one of our superiors and been like, hey, this was wrong. This needs to be, reconciled. I could have confronted them. I basically just went through and listed all my options. And at the end of the day, none of those were going to make me feel better. If anything, those were just going to open more doors for more drama, for more stuff to happen. And so I realized it was something that was within me that I had to deal with.
What's interesting is if somebody was like, but I want to fix it, or I like that person still, even if that was your goal, because I've been in that situation where it's like, no, you don't understand. The times of my life it's actually happened are once I worked through those steps and let it go. Like in the case of the job, it's ironic that I got hired back once I stopped being angry and stopped thinking about it. In the case of relationships, it's sort of like if you were interested in maybe that person long term and thought we were so perfect, nothing's going to change until you've worked through that stuff. It never happens while you're still in the angry, victim-y, hate stage.
Or if you are a victim, if you do feel like a victim and you're taking the victim mentality, then recognizing that within yourself and figuring out how you're going to fix that first. Because before you fix anything with anybody else ever, you have to be in a good space to be able to actually have the proper conversations and communicate effectively.
So yes, remember, so forgiving people or letting go of things, it's not giving in, move past it. I think one last thing is, I think it always helps a little bit to look at I don't mean what's the bright side, like a bunch of false sunshine, but just kind of like, I've had some things happen to me that I was angry about for a while. And then I finally looked and said, all right, maybe I dodged a bullet. And what are the good things that could happen now as a result of this? It's a little bit hard at first because everything seems kind of dark, but there's always a bright side to in what way am I more free now to pursue something else.
Right. And you probably have felt this too, but it's almost like you have to swallow your pride. You have to kill the ego, because at first, especially when things are not fair, it can be really difficult to accept that it's just not going to be fair. And that doesn't always feel really good at first. Like it's almost an uneasiness, like a discomfort, like, oh, I want this to be fixed. But then eventually, this was in my case at least, I felt so free.
Kind of a random question, along with the victimhood thing, and let's use relationships as an example. Don't you kind of agree the hard part about going through any type of relationship, maybe somebody broke up with you and you felt like a victim, the fun part is actually the initial period because you get a lot of sympathy. I think the hard part is like a few months later when no one cares.
No one cares.
Like, yes. And if you actually talk about it, they're like, oh, you're still talking
like,
about
let
that?
It go. No, one of my exes, yes, I was basically wronged very badly. And yeah, at first it was like, everyone was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy.
Tell me about it. What do you think?
What happened? Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this happened. I'm so sorry.
Oh yeah, and you tell the story 20 times.
I brought it up about a year later, and it was like, okay. I recognized that in myself, that I was like, okay, I should probably not bring this story up anymore because it doesn't matter. And I'm not the same person that I was a year ago, and nobody cares. Nobody wants to hear my story like that. But a lot of people don't recognize those things. But I guess with your close friends question, do you think that it's our responsibility to have that conversation with somebody like, hey, you need to stop talking about that? Or do you let them get to that point on their own?
I think it's in the middle. I think obviously, once again, the most annoying thing on earth is if you want to, I guess I'll say, puke about a situation and somebody interrupts you, or don't even feel like you get it all out. But the first thing they say after you get it all out is, you just got to move on. It just sort of seems kind of disingenuous and not very
they weren't listening.
Yeah, they don't care, and just they're giving you platitudes that don't help.
Sure.
At a certain point, it would help if my friends indirectly helped me with the job thing, because one time I called one of them and I was probably going through the same rant or some new thing I'd come up with on why what had happened was unfair, and he actually said, look man, I can't talk to you anymore. I work for this company, and it's kind of bothering me now. And he said, sorry, I love you, but I gotta go. And I was like, still, it took me to watch the movie. I was probably pissed at him for a long time, but I think it helps if friends will step in and kind of provide some perspective if they are willing to do that. It helps in the long term. It can shorten the period of grieving. I do think that's an important role to play.
Well, the victimhood stuff, I think it all kind of ties in together, just like recognize who you are, and getting to the point where you honestly want to stop, are okay with you're done bothering people with it. Yeah.
I also think on the grand scheme of all society, victimhood's terrible because, once again, instead of people being excited about what they can accomplish and how anything is possible, and especially in a free society that's prosperous, you can literally, every day is a blessing. You can do anything. I think people get into a mindset of just thinking the world's a dirty, dark place of unfairness, and that's a horrible way to live.
Yeah.
Like I said, victimhood feels good at first. Long term, it will rot you. It's like the poison you'll drink. Same with anger, hate. It'll destroy you on the inside. Learn to get through it quicker, work it out quicker, and it's not easy. But if you're self-aware and you take some responsibility, or you just practice doing different perspectives. I was going to say the other thing too is anytime you're in that stage, you got to be busy and you got to do something that's kind of forward thinking. If you're just sitting around thinking about what happened to you, that is the worst possible way.
Well said.
And eventually talking about it just feeds it.
Just keep on moving. Don't hold grudges and get over it.
All right. Thanks.